All right, thank you, Brett. Now, history often repeats itself. COVID pandemic is no exception. Today, an OSU professor of history who has studied the 1918 pandemic extensively joined a forum and shed some light on the repeat actions he's seeing and how today's modern world isn't far off from the early 19th century.
What we're seeing now is very similar to fall into winter 1918-19. Americans were fatigued by restrictions and sort of endless pandemic. They began to balk at the guidance of public health professionals.
There are strong similarities all throughout the pandemic when compared to the pandemic of 1918, but especially now as we encounter year 3 of the coronavirus and people grow increasingly less tolerant of safety measures suggested by public health.
Then, like now, there was a push by special interests, particularly in some cities and counties, to open more rapidly, pitting sort of general public health against the health of the economy, which was a false dichotomy then as it is now.
Just like in 1918, a lack of communication is the #1 problem.
In the historical record, one thing that's fascinating is the lack of communication. Clear, coherent, honest communication is the #1 problem with doing that. And we've seen that throughout this, from the Trump administration through the Biden administration.
And there was pushback in 1918 as well. Journalists of the time described communication surrounding the pandemic as indescribable confusion.
But as people were more confused about how to take reasonable measures to safeguard themselves and their families, they actually withdraw more, or they fight more. And that the historical record clearly shows that. So that's actually when you find the anti-mask league, the one and only sort of really organized group that pushes back. And that's in January and February 1919. And that's very short-lived. But
just like we see in history, pandemic fatigue today has also been driven in part by confusion surrounding ever-changing safety guidance, or guidance that isn't realistic in implementation or enforcement.
The rules don't map onto sort of the reality of everyday people. And generally, as people continue to sense unfairness related to the pandemic, it contributes to fatigue. So it just makes it harder to get public buy-in on restrictions and policies.
Ultimately, what ended the 1918 pandemic was a cooperation. And in today's forum were researchers who have been taking a second look at COVID testing, stating today that the way we test for COVID may be incorrect. We're going to take a deeper dive into that new information tonight at 5.